Hi, and thanks for joining us for C-SPAN's Q&A podcast. I'm your host, Peter Slett. This week, we sit down with 91-year-old Virginia Ali, the longtime owner of the iconic Ben's Chili Bowl restaurant in Washington, D.C., which, for the past 65 years, has served as a hangout for civil rights activists, politicians, and celebrities. On April 4th, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in Memphis. At the same time, Virginia Ali was 900 miles away, tending the grill at Ben's Chili Bowl restaurant on U Street in Washington, D.C. Dr. King had been a regular customer at Ben's. After his assassination, the capital erupted in riots and protests. Ben's Chili Bowl, in the heart of the African American business community, was the only business allowed to stay open during that time. Well, Q&A sat down with the 91-year-old Ben's Chili Bowl owner, Virginia Ali, along with Ben's Chili Bowl official historian, Bernard Demczuk. We talked about the history of the Washington, D.C. landmark. Since it opened in 1958 by Ben and Virginia Ali, Ben's Chili Bowl has been a hangout for civil rights activists, politicians, and celebrities for over 65 years. Recently, Bernard Demczuk published a book about Mrs. Ali and Ben's entitled Breaking Barriers with Chili. That podcast begins in just a moment. Virginia Ali, owner of Ben's Chili Bowl since the Eisenhower administration. Who sat at the counter where you're sitting right now? Who are some of the folks?
Oh my goodness, there were musicians, let's see, what names? Oh wow, there was Jesse Jackson on occasion. He was in Washington a lot. But our neighborhood people were the ones that were most important to me.
How often would they come in?
At least several times a week. As a matter of fact, one of my young ladies, or several of them, would see someone parking the car across the street, and by the time they sat here, their food was in front of them. That's how frequent those visits were.
Who was Ben Ali?
My husband, for 51 years before he died.
1958?
Yes.
You opened this? Why'd you open Ben's Chili Bowl?
Well, my husband came from Trinidad to matriculate at our universities. First at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln, Nebraska. And then when he was finished with that, he came to Washington to attend Howard University's dental school. Well, he had a big accident and was unable to complete that program. But he'd worked his way through college by working in restaurants. So I'm working down the street at the bank. We met, and seeing it, we formally introduced and all that, and fell in love and wanted to be married. And he was the one that came up with the great idea of, Jen, would you be willing to partner with me in a little restaurant? In the meantime, I learned while I worked at that bank how much I enjoyed interacting with different people all day long. So when he thought of coming up with the restaurant, all I could think of, more people for me to enjoy. That's how it all came about.
You came to Washington in 1952 from?
From Occupation, Virginia.
Where is that?
Near the big little town of Tappahannock. It's about 100 miles south of here.
What brought you to D.C.?
Well, I just went where my father owned a large farm, almost 300-acre farm, and he was able to make our living there, and we had this wonderful, warm, loving, caring family growing up on the farm where we were really self-supported for the most part. The only thing we needed from the store when I was a little girl were the things we didn't produce: coffee, tea, sugar, salt, vanilla. So it was a wonderful way to grow up. But after I was older, I felt like I wanted to explore the city. And I'd been to Washington many times, had relatives here, and I thought it was such a beautiful city. Came to Washington.
What was the U Street corridor of D.C. like in 1958?
Wow, it was such an amazing, self-supported but segregated community. And this U Street corridor was known as Black Broadway because it was the entertainment center for African Americans. And you know, I always remember Howard University opened in 1867. So we had these highly educated people in what we call the Shaw community. It was classy, it was proud, it was dignified, and it was wonderful.
Some of Ben's Chili Bowl customers over the years include Martin Luther King Jr., Thurgood Marshall, Stokely Carmichael, Julian Bond, Bayard Rustin.
Oh, yes.
The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was located very close to here, correct?
Right across the street.
And they would come in, Stokely, and would come in regularly?
Stokely was a visitor on a daily basis. And I remember him because he was so personable, very handsome, and all about equality, trying to work for equality in this country.
April 4th, 1968. What do you remember about that date?
I remember someone walking through the door.
Were you working the counter at the time?
I was down here in the evening, just before it's time for me to go home, and someone just announces that Dr. King has been shot. Well, we don't believe that at all. We don't believe that. We'd met Dr. King and been here and visited us several times, and our beloved nonviolent leader couldn't possibly be true, but it was true. And finally, someone found a transistor radio a little later on, and yes, he was gone. So people were crying openly, people were sad, people were upset, and then frustrated, and I think then angry. And the rest was not very pleasant.
How often would Dr. King come in here?
Well, in 1963, when he was planning that march, he came pretty often. He had a little satellite office just a few blocks away. So he would pop in any old time, and there would sometimes be some of his comrades, I think even on occasion, young John Lewis and all that. And he would tell me some interesting stories. One that I remember in particular was the one he said when he had a meeting with President Kennedy. He and a few of them had a meeting, and they informed President Kennedy about the injustices of black people, and that they planned to bring a whole lot of people here to protest that. And he said, President Kennedy said, well, I don't think that's a good idea. We want to help you, but don't think that's a good idea. Because if there's an incident, Dr. King, it will set your movement back. And Dr. King said, there won't be an incident. Well, as we all know, he brought 250,000 people here that day. Ben and I were there. It was just an absolutely glorious, inspiring day. We came away knowing that change is going to come. And it did. We passed the Civil Rights Bill in 1964. So, but 5 years later, this is what happened.
Also joining us is Bernard Demczuk, who is the author of this book, Breaking Barriers with Chili. You are the official or unofficial historian of Ben's Chili Bowl, correct?
Well, I'm the official because she made me the official. That's it, yes. And I think, and I may be wrong, but I think we're the only restaurant in America that has its own PhD minted historian.
How did you become that? How did you find your interest here?
Well, I am a historian, and I've been involved in the civil rights movement forever. And I just realized that this was the place to be on U Street, and U Street was the place to be in Washington, D.C., and Washington, D.C. is the nation's capital. So it all came down to this little space. You've got the Lincoln Theater, you've got this extraordinary community, and I found myself just in love with the people and, of course, the hot dogs, and Just been coming here since 1967.
Where did the moniker Black Broadway come from?
It comes from the late 1940s of Pearl Bailey.
Yeah.
Would sing here next door at the Lincoln, and she would go over next door, which was the Kasbah back then, and that was her hangout. And she was being interviewed by a reporter, and the reporter said to her simply, "Mrs. Bailey, why is this such a popular strip here?" And she goes, "Well, you know what, honey? They won't let us play up on Broadway, so we created our own Black Broadway."
Mm-hmm.
He wrote it in an article, and it stuck.
Tell us about the U Street corridor and its history.
Well, U Street corridor really goes back, and you have to be careful asking a historian a simple question. We go back 300 years, but it really started in the Civil War. This became a contraband camp, and this is where African Americans fleeing slavery in the 1860s settled in this area. Eventually, when they began, actually built shanty towns here, and eventually they moved over to Berry Farm, and this then was known as Boundary Street. This was the northernmost boundary of the city of Washington. And African Americans began to build their little community here, and it just kept going and going and going. And then 1867, Howard University. So Howard University is a 5-minute walk from here, and it began to burgeon as a result. 1910, the Howard Theater. Howard Theater was the premier African American theater in the world in 1910. Once you begin to get Howard Theater and you begin to get these professionals from Howard University, the place takes off. It becomes an incubator for African American excellence and genius and progress.
Bernard Demczuk, Virginia Ali, arrives in 1952. What was going on in the country at that point, and what was D.C. like?
Well, 1952, of course, was a segregated period of time in America. We had just come from the World War II, and the black GIs in World War II, some took advantage of the GI Bill and they went to Howard University. These men who were trained to fight and did fight in the South Pacific and in Europe, when they came back, they had to sit on the back of the bus. They could not sit at a white lunch counter, even in DC. And that infuriated them to the point that they said, look, if we can defeat the Nazis in Europe, we can defeat racism here at home. And so this area here really becomes the space and place for the modern civil rights movement. Student Nonviolent Coordinated Committee across the street. Dr. King's Southern Christian Leadership Conference down the street. NAAC around the corner. This was the place. 3 black newspapers were here. So what you begin to see is, yes, America is segregated, but people are going to try to change that. And where they begin to change that is out of Howard University, and U Street becomes the place. And so in 1952, when she came here, this is a segregated community, but it was a dynamic segregated community.
Mm-hmm.
How would you describe the role of Ben's Chili Bowl through our history?
I think every city has a great space and place for African Americans to go to and feel safe and feel as if this is our place to talk, to eat, to socialize, to listen to a jukebox. This is a place. So New Orleans has Dookie Chase. Atlanta has Pascal's. New York has Sylvia's. Chicago has Army and Lou's. DC had Ben's Chili Bowl. So Ben's Chili Bowl was a space and place that people could go to and feel comfortable. The police respected it. They didn't come in here because they knew it was a place that people could socialize and relax and, quite frankly, exhale from the world on the outside.
More Ben's Chili Bowl customers: Andrew Young, Charles Hamilton Houston, A. Philip Randolph, John Lewis, Marion Barry, Eleanor Holmes Norton, and a woman named Odessa Madre. Who was Odessa Madre, Virginia LA?
You answer that one, Bernard.
No.
She was a graduate of the prominent Dunbar High School,
Yes,
which was a prestigious college prep high school,
Graduated
and then on
at the
to
top of her
Howard.
class. She went up. She was at the top of her class.
Yes. And
Dunbar, is the premier African American high school, founded in 1870.
yeah,
And Dunbar has 8 graduates on U.S. postal stamps.
yeah,
No other school has that in the country.
right.
So it was a very elite African American school.
Yeah. And she felt like, someone said, perhaps because of her color. Was that right, Bernard?
Well, she was
That
dark.
she didn't think she
was
could go as
large.
far as most of and achieve what everybody else was achieving. So she found a different way to make her living.
And maybe we should turn to Bernard Demczuk
Yes,
to find
tell
out
us
that
about
way.
that, Bernard.
How did she make her living, Mr. Demczuk?
She was very talented. She was actually very good in math and sciences. And she wanted to go to Howard, but she felt as if Howard was a little bit too elitist for her, even though she came from a prominent middle-class community, living in LaJoy Park, which is an upscale black community. But she felt as if the black community at Howard did not accept her because of her skin color, and because she was large, and because she was loud, and she was lesbian. And that was taboo in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s.
Yeah.
And so she figured out, if they're going to close this door to me in elite black Washington, I think I'll open another door for myself. And that became the underworld. And she became the boss of DC's underworld.
You compare her in your book to Al Capone.
And I do so because, in America we have these sort of mythological heroes, anti-heroes. The Godfather, Al Capone, The Sopranos, Bonnie and Clyde. So we sort of revere these outlaws who go against the establishment. Well, if the white community can have its outlaws, the black community can have its as well. And Odessa Madre was an outlaw who was not selfish, because she was very wealthy, and she always tried to help people out with money. She would literally give money away out on the street.
Was she a customer here at Ben's Chili Bowl, Virginia LA?
I didn't know her well. I don't think
She was at Industrial Bank, not here, I don't think.
I met her at Industrial Bank as a teller.
Yeah.
Charles Hamilton Houston.
Yeah.
Who was he?
The lawyer down the street there.
He was the theoretician behind Brown versus Board.
Yes.
He was the dean of Howard's Law School. He was brilliant. He unfortunately joined the ancestors before Brown versus Board, but his student was Thurgood Marshall.
Yeah.
Let's return to April 4th, 1968. Did you stay open? Did Ben stay open?
Yes. We were the only place that was allowed to remain open.
Allowed to remain open?
Oh, we actually asked to remain open during that time. We were the only place. And of course, we had these hours. We opened at 11 in the morning in those days, and we closed at 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. on Friday and Saturday nights. So we were, you could see everything in here. We had the reputation of being a part of this wonderful community and of welcoming everybody and treating everybody the way you want to be treated. And it was a meeting place. It was a gathering place. So when I got a message from the commander at the precinct, which was right down the street, saying that we have passes for your night team to come to work tonight.
So they shut this area down. There was rioting, correct?
Oh, yes. Out of respect for Dr. King. Isn't that correct, Bernard?
I think so, absolutely.
Out of respect for Dr. King, they wanted everything closed in D.C. And that uprising took place, but we were on the curfew for 3 nights, and we were the only place open.
As you walk up and down U Street, you see new buildings, high-rises, luxury places. All of those new buildings used to be 19-teens and 20s townhouses that were burned out during the rebellion.
Yeah.
5 days of rioting, 13 killed, 7,600 people arrested. What was the aftermath of being in this area after those 5 days and for quite a while afterwards?
Oh my goodness. The businesses didn't reopen. Middle class moved away. After that, heroin moved in, crack cocaine. We became a big ghetto for a very long time. A serious ghetto for a very long time. And then finally in 1988, the city says, okay, we're going to do something for this very poor community. We're going to build a subway right across the street. So when they did the survey, they found that in the immediate vicinity, only 3 places were still there. That bank, Industrial Bank, still there today, Lee's Flower Shop, and Ben's Chili Bowl. Not enough to support maintaining 1 lane of traffic out there. They dug up the entire street, 65 feet down. We were the only place that was open, and I only had 1 employee, Peaches.
And you had to come through the alley to get into Ben's.
Yeah.
And there was a sign in the front and a sign in the back saying Ben's down the alley, because you couldn't walk on the street for 4 years. It was torn up.
Virginia Ali, were you and Ben Ali scared that you were going to have to close?
Of course,
financially?
Of course, we didn't know what was going to happen to us. We didn't know what was going to happen, but we had been a part of this community for 10 years, and somehow people found a way to get here, and we had, we ordered what we needed, which wasn't much. It was a very difficult time. But economically, it was the worst time ever, that subway construction.
Bernard Demczuk, you write in your book, Breaking Barriers with Chile, our nation's capital was ground zero for that struggle to expand the franchise to vote and expand voting rights, women's rights, and desegregation. No place was more central to the freedom cause in the 1960s and 70s than U Street.
Yeah, once again, all due credit to the good people in Alabama and Selma, the good people in Mississippi who fought for voting rights and for integration in the South. All of that was important. Birmingham. But the movement needed an intellectual base in which to theorize and to send out the message of how civil rights could be achieved. And that was Howard University in the U Street area. As I mentioned earlier, all the great civil rights organizations were here, 3 black newspapers were here, and guess what else was here? The White House and the United States Congress, and people of goodwill who wanted to change America's segregated society, and they lived here, and this was the place to go. If you're going to leverage, of course you can leverage in Selma, Alabama, or Birmingham, but if you're going to really legislate, you have to legislate on the Hill and need the White House support. And fortunately, first Eisenhower did a good job on Little Rock Central High School, but then the Kennedys came along, and then after the Kennedys, Lyndon Johnson. It was important to be here. This was ground zero for power, and power makes things happen.
At what point did Ben's become an institution?
I think you could probably argue that night of April 4th, 5th, and 6th, 68, when it was the only business to be permitted to stay open, because the police, the National Guard, the activists, they needed a space and place to meet and strategize to quell the rebellion. I think that was the beginning, that people said, look, everybody's closed except Ben's. And if we go forward to 2020 with the epidemic, we were the only place that stayed open making sandwiches and hot dogs, and we were giving them away free during the pandemic to first responders, nurses in the hospitals, EMT workers, the police, the fire department. We did not close up. We made food and gave it away free. So I would say 68, but we've continued that since then.
Virginia Ali, you're quoted in Breaking Barriers with Chile. One of the greatest joys is serving people from all walks of life. whether it is a junkie sitting at the counter next to a judge or a homeless person sitting next to a member of Congress, all of them have an interesting story. I'm interested in hearing their story and telling them mine.
I love that. I love people. I grew up in an environment where we were taught to treat everybody the way you want to be treated. And I just had that love for people, and I discovered that when I worked at Industrial Bank, interacting with people. And now I'm 90 years old, and I still can't keep myself away from here.
Do you ever work the counter anymore?
Well, I don't take orders because the memory isn't good. But I do greet people and see what I can do to make their visit better. Because, as I said, I want to hear their stories. They want to hear mine, but I also want to hear theirs.
As you worked here over the last 60 years, where was your position? Everywhere?
Everywhere. I came in as a cashier, remember? I came in as a cashier, but yes, it turned out to be everything. You do everything. Whatever is needed is what you do.
May I add that she oversees the grill because she wants to make sure they are perfectly charred before they put on a bun. You just can't throw a hot dog on a bun.
Yeah.
It's got to be perfectly charred, and her eagle eye makes sure.
Well, that goes along with treating people the way you want to be treated. That's the way I want to eat mine. I want you to have one just like mine.
I did notice on the menu up here on the board, there are no prices.
Well, that was the new generation. I didn't do that.
Is there a reason?
I have. Vita, where are you?
Is that your daughter-in-law back there?
Everybody has one of those little phone things.
No, you know what happened?
Push a button.
No, but what really happened was because during the pandemic, we couldn't use menus anymore. And we haven't gotten back to using menus up to now. We had beautiful menus with prices and descriptions and pictures. I was very proud of those menus, but because of the pandemic, everything has to be so sterile, we couldn't use them. It's against the law. So we haven't gotten back to that yet.
Virginia Ali, what is this sitting behind me?
It is the mood of the Chili Bowl. It's our jukebox. It's our jukebox in which we opened with a jukebox, and I remember there was this old guy from the service. It was a veteran, Harvey. You remember Harvey? Mm-hmm. And Harvey was a person that lived in the community, and he came in one day as we were building this place, and he said, "You need a jukebox." Okay, well, we don't know anything about getting a jukebox, so he helped us get through the jukebox, told us where to get the records and how to put the records on and the whole bit. And it was always our jukebox. Yeah.
And this is the original?
No, it's not the original, but it's close.
Yeah, it's nice. And the jukebox, we're the only remaining jukebox on U Street, and one of the few in Washington, D.C. But when you walk down the street and the door opens and soul music is blasting out into the street, and you look through that window and you see those chili dogs and half smokes charring, and then you get a woof of that smell, and you see it and you smell it, and then you hear the music, you want to come in. You want to come in. This is a place to be.
Jesse Jackson, George W. Bush, Hillary Clinton, Cornel West, French President Nicolas Sarkozy, Dick Gregory, and in January of 2009, you had a special guest come in here unexpectedly. Who was that?
Our former President Obama. His very first outing in Washington after he was elected president, and just a short time before his inauguration, he came to eat out in Washington, right here, and sat there where you see the seal, and that's the picture. He was accompanied with the mayor at that time, Adrian Fenty, and it was just a delightful surprise.
You did not know in advance that he was coming. Were you working that day?
No, I was. Yes, I was here, but he was. The way they do it, the Secret Service comes in first. We're not paying any attention to Secret Service. And the Secret Service comes in first, and they look around and make sure everything is just fine. And then he and the mayor walks in, and they lock the door. It's on a Saturday. Saturdays is always our busiest day, so the place had lots of people. And then they closed the entire street, the whole block. You couldn't drive through the block at that time. It was a very exciting time, a very, very exciting time. And because it was his first outing in D.C., it made newspapers across the country.
Has he been back since?
Oh, yes. As a matter of fact, he was here about a year ago to do an interview, and they asked us to close that day.
And that's where he sits, right, where the sticker is.
Exactly, exactly. That's what he said.
Now there's a plaque next to that sticker. Bernard Demczuk, PhD with office hours.
Well, you know, Peter,
that was going on for a long time. The pandemic changed that a little bit too.
You know, Peter, this area here, across from the jukebox, strategically placed, right? This area here was sort of the gathering place of the civil rights activists and any other activists. Could be anti-war, could be environmental, could be Marion Barry and his, his plans to get reelected. This sort of became a place to stop and hang out. And I would sit there, or I sit here, and starting in 1981, I sort of commandeered this area, and I've been sitting at this spot for 43 years, watching her magic.
And
do people come in and talk to you?
Oh, sure.
And he's got a phone number.
Oh, sure.
They would call him and make appointments.
My email.
Yeah, when they wanted real deep history.
People actually call me and say, can I come and talk about? And I said, what do you want to talk about? I want to talk about the Civil War and the United States colored troops. I said, come on down, let's talk.
Yeah.
Where did you teach in the past?
George Washington University. Today I teach at the National Museum, African American History and Culture, and I've taught at DC Public Schools, School Without Walls. But I've done all of that part-time because I was a full-time administrator and or government worker with Marion Barry. But all of my teaching has always been part-time, but just my love of history and teaching is what drives me to want. And we use the back room that sits about 55 people as a classroom for students, high school students, college students, people coming from North Carolina with a bus load, and they want to get a tutorial on the history of Black DC. I speak to them in the back.
I would like to hear from both of you about the complicated legacy of Marion Barry.
Marion Barry was such a smart, bright man that loved his people so much. And I don't know what would have happened if he had not gotten into trouble. He was so brilliant. He was just, and had a photographic mind.
He did.
He remembered everything. He'd come and meet you. What's your name? Virginia Alley. He'd repeat it. And you could see him 3 months from now and he'd know my name. I've seen him do that with people, you know. And as I said, he was very, very, very astute with politics, and he really, really loved his people. Bernard knows him, right?
Yeah, I was with him for well over 25 years, in and out of government, but very close to him. The photographic memory is really interesting, and people always talk about this. I met Marion Barry once, said hello to him. He said, "What's your name?" "My name is Betty." "Where do you live?" "I live at 1211 Fairmont Street, Northwest." "Okay, nice to see you, Betty." Shake hands, and that's it. 6 months later, runs into Betty. "Hey, Betty, you still on Fairmont Street?" He could remember everything.
Yeah.
And it was just really quite extraordinary. And very personable, very proud, stood up straight, you know, and was very handsome.
And what was his degree in chemistry or something?
He was almost, he's got his PhD in chemistry.
Yeah.
But civil rights got him out of academia. And we call him mayor for life. You know, he won 4 times. And extraordinarily, he gets out of jail for a misdemeanor and runs for mayor again and wins. Who does that? the guy was dynamic, and he may have had some personal demons, which we all know is true, but he was a beautiful man and very smart and very kind. And by the way, he spoke very softly, very softly. Unless he gave a speech, then he would be, have this bravado, but he was always a soft speaking person.
Yeah.
Virginia Ali, you catered one of his inaugurals, didn't you?
Yes, we did. We had his book signing right there in their back room.
Mm-hmm.
We did all that, yeah.
We know about Barack Obama coming here, but you've also got a picture of George W. Bush here at Ben's. How did that happen?
Well, George W. Bush wasn't actually here.
He was
At the
down
school.
the street,
Yeah.
painting a wall, a high school,
Uh-huh.
renovating a high school, and he was painting the Ben's Chili Bowl symbol, and that's how people think. So we got a picture of that, and people say, "Oh, he's been at Ben's." He wasn't. He was down the street painting a Ben's Chili Bowl
Painting
symbol.
a Ben's Chili Bowl sign.
Did Bill Clinton ever come in?
Yeah, Hillary is most often. And actually, we did a fundraiser for her last Senate seat in New York. And remember that? We had she spoke in the back room, and we left the restaurant open, but we just used the back room and the middle room, and we had a permit from the district government to serve champagne with chili dogs.
In 1963, August 1963, the March on Washington,
Uh-huh.
you said that you and your husband, Ben, were at the march. Did you close Ben's Chili Bowl that
No,
day?
we had a team that could take care of the restaurant.
Was it a busy day?
Absolutely. It was a very busy day. People thousands of people formed a line out there for the longest time. People often ask me, "How'd you get there?" We drove as far as we could, and we did a lot of walking. That's how we got there. But then after it was over, until 4 o'clock in the morning, we were busy. Yeah,
Presidential inaugurations come through Washington.
yeah,
Are those busy times for Ben's Chili Bowl?
absolutely. And then articles in the paper. What paper was it? Which paper was it that on the front page of the travel section was a picture of the Lincoln Memorial? You're going to Washington to the inauguration? I believe it was
Post.
President Bush, yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Was it
Washington
No,
Post.
but there was a picture from that state that they were coming in from. On that travel section, you're going to Washington, D.C., these are the things you need to do. Go to the inauguration, see this museum, and check out Ben's Chili Bowl.
Do you still have people coming in today in 2024 who this is a destination spot for them?
Oh, my goodness, yes.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Becoming more so now. It's interesting that with social media and with instant information flow, and people like to have fun, and this is a fun place. And one of the things that we really emphasize is that you will be happy in this place. You'll be happy because we got music, we got good people, we got good food, and it's a happy place. So people all over the world, literally all over the world, find this as a destination spot.
And they come in and show me, oh, I know you, you're Virginia. Yes, how did you know? Well, I saw it on a video at home. Anywhere, someplace in Europe, could be the Middle East, anywhere. It's really fun.
Speaking of music, Bernard Demczuk in his book, Breaking Barriers with Chili, calls you out for your love of music and theater when you were growing up here in Washington, D.C.
Oh, yeah. Well, that was the thing to do, We had great musicians. We had great music halls, and we had the jazz clubs and the jazz music places that was so wonderful. So I do love music, and I certainly love food too. Now I tell people we've got people from every corner of the globe in our beautiful city and in the DMV. And we've got restaurants from there all over as well. So I love living at this period in time. I feel like I've lived through the best years of the USA.
You also lived through the crack epidemic here in Washington, D.C.
Yes.
What was that like?
It was very sad to see what's happening to our young people. It was very, very sad. And, I got to know some of them and try to find out why you were doing what you're doing and how it happened to you. And I remember one time asking a young man, I said, you know, I have 3 sons, and I don't want him to do what you're doing. So tell me what I can do to prevent that. He said, well, I don't really know, but if they do get hooked, let's make sure they get clean needles. Now I don't want to hear that part. But I felt free to talk to people, because when you treat them the way you want to be treated, they talk with you. And I could ask them all kinds of questions, and they would give me their honest opinion. Make sure he gets clean needles if he's going to be injecting a drug. That wasn't the answer I needed, but that's what he told me.
When you walk in Ben's, there is a message down below the counter.
Yeah.
What is that message?
Our love of people and the service that we try to provide, and how important people are to us. People are very important to us, and I love them.
2009, Ben passes.
Yeah.
How did that impact Ben's Chili Bowl?
Well, Ben was a very strong personality here, and of course we missed him. He did have a later interest in life, which meant he wasn't spending as much time here as he used to. You know, we had computers by that time. We used to have a ticker tape at home because he loved the stock market.
He traveled. He traveled.
And we did. And
They
we
both
were married. We were married 10 years before we had a week's vacation together. We would get a little 2 days here and 2 days there, but one of us stayed to make sure that this was going to be okay. We took vacations, but one of us stayed for a 10-day vacation or whatever. I would go to Trinidad and hang out with his family. He would go wherever he felt like going. And then when the boys joined us, which was the biggest surprise of all for me, we sent them to the best schools, and very happy that they decided to join Mom in this business. When they started, the first one came, I think, in the mid-'80s. It's when we started our travels. And we were able to see a little bit of the world.
The fact that he was Muslim and you were Christian getting married in 1958, was that a big deal?
That was a big deal, because my minister from my Christian church refused to marry us. And we decided since we were going to open up a restaurant, we won't have any big ceremony and all that. We were married in the judge's chambers, because the Christian minister wouldn't marry me to the Muslim. And there was, in the state of Virginia, there was a racial thing, you know? 2 different races, actually. Ben was really known as Caucasian, although as dark as he was.
He was known as what?
Caucasian in some places.
Yeah.
I remember a driver's license having that on it once.
Yeah, so Virginia, the state,
Yeah.
passed in 1924 the Purity Blood Act,
Right.
and that separated the races, both Native Americans and blacks and whites, and that lasted all the way until Loving Supreme Court case, and that was 1967. So it was dangerous for them to be together back in the 50s.
In the state of Virginia.
In the state of Virginia.
Yeah.
That's quite a mural out in Ben Alley Way next to the restaurant. Who started that mural?
One of our council members, what's his name?
Jim Graham.
Jim Graham, came up with a brilliant idea, because we had this beautiful white wall out there, and everybody else had this being clean walls on the sides of their buildings. And he came up with an idea: if we maybe if we do a mural or some painting, maybe it won't get all messed up. Okay, we thought, that's a great idea. So the city really was the one that takes credit for the murals. And we were the ones that said, oh, this is what we want to have on our walls. And that's how it all came about. What you see out there now, we had the community help us decide what to put up there. You could go online and vote for whom you wanted to see. And how many votes did we
We
have?
had 30,000 votes, and these
It was amazing.
these 19 people were the highest vote getters.
Right. It was amazing. I'm like, these, and then older people were coming in and saying to me, you know, I don't do the computer, but I wrote down a few names. It was very special. I'm like, wow, my wall is important. Wow. Yeah.
Denzel Washington, Bill Cosby, Chuck Brown, James Brown, Pearl Bailey, Anthony Bourdain, Serena Williams, Kevin Hart, Roberta Flack, Chubby Checker, Russell Crowe, Allen Iverson, Danny Glover, Shaquille O'Neal have all been customers here at Ben's. Do they wait in line with everybody else?
Yes, they don't mind. Most of them would say, no, I want the experience. Many of them would say, I want the experience. We have had one or two that say, can we come in the back door? We've had a few to do that, and we say, yes, you can come in the back door.
You forgot Dr. Dre. Dr. Dre came here, and he wanted to learn how to do the chili dog and prepare, and he put on a white shirt, he went back there, and he started making chili dogs for people.
Because he was doing a video.
Yeah, he was doing a video, and Mrs. Ali went up to him and said, you're not doing it right, and she actually fired him.
That was part of the
She
script.
fired him on the video.
That was part of the script. Denzel Washington did a scene from The Pelican Brief here. Russell Crowe did a scene from State of Play. It was wonderful to see how they do that and how meticulous they are. And I just remember we had a Coca-Cola clock up here. We were serving Coke at the time. And they were being financed by Pepsi or vice versa. And I come in one day when they were planning to do their filming, and somebody's on the ladder painting this new clock that they put up there with a little brush. I'm like, what are you doing? We don't want it to look so new. It had to blend in. So they were kind of making it look a little bit dingy, this new clock. I'm like, nobody's looking up there. The camera's not going to, yeah, we have to touch it. They did everything. So it was so much fun to see that filming take place. One summer, when somebody was filming and it was really hot, I said, it's going to be really hot back there. Okay. They brought their own big old coil thing and their generator, and they just shoot the cool air. So we closed for them to do that a little bit. We had a film done recently, a documentary that was filmed here and that was picked up by Sundance. You're in that one?
Frequent documentaries and a lot of student documentaries.
Yeah.
So Howard University, George Washington, Georgetown. The students, of course, are studying to be cinematographers and or documentary producers, and they like to come here. It's a fun place to shoot.
Has the front of Ben's Chili Bowl changed in 60-some years?
No.
Same front window, same
front
design?
with the grill in the window. You can't get that done now if you were building a new place.
No?
No grills in the window. Yeah.
Bright yellow and red with lights all over the place. You can't miss it walking down the street.
It was an old silent movie theater, you know, that's what the building was.
This building was?
Mm-hmm. There's a picture of it in the back, yeah. Yeah, it was fun.
Gentrification. The lack of black-owned businesses. You report in your book, Bernard Demczuk, how many businesses in this area were black-owned at one time. Does that stand today?
No. Well, it was over 200. So remember, we're a segregated community back then. And this was the African American business, political, cultural section. We had 5 major theaters. We had 14 blues and jazz joints, 12 barbershops and beauty salons. Think about that. In a 12-block space, 12 barbershops and beauty salons. So this was the place to be. There were well over 200 African American businesses here. There's only 5 now.
Yeah.
Only
Really?
5. There's only 5 now.
How would you describe?
Well, no, I'm sorry. There are more beginning to happen now. Yes, they're beginning to happen, but only 5 since
Only 5
1968.
survived, yeah.
Since 1968.
How would you describe the neighborhood today?
Young, highly educated people. Young, highly educated people. Yes.
Diverse?
No, not this immediate community. I don't think it's diverse. No. But I'm not out here a lot at night and everything. My kids would probably know who they're hanging out with because I knew the neighborhood. Knew the people by name, and they knew me, you know, because during those days, it was a close-knit community. When we went out socially, saw the same people you saw during the day. When you go to the theater, or when you go to the dance hall or whatever, or dinner. Mm-hmm.
Well, let's talk practical matters a little bit. Who came up with the menu, and what's the secret sauce? Who invented that?
Well, Ben and I came up with the menu, and it was a very limited menu back there. Then when our sons joined us, they kept adding more and more things, and before you know it, there are vegetarian options of all kinds and that kind of thing. So they're the ones that continued the menu and continues it today. The chili sauce has always been very special. It was something that I think Ben started the creation of it, yes. Ben was Ben's special recipe. And I've added a little bit here and there, and we only had chili sauce back there. And then later on we added the chili con carne and the veggie chili and the turkey chili and all that kind of thing. So it's growing.
Did Ben come up with the sauce? Was that his invention?
It was Ben's invention in the beginning, yes. Yes.
How many people know what it is? Besides you.
My children, me, and Peaches. And
Who
she
was
took it with
Peaches?
us.
Yeah, you write about her in your book.
Yeah, Peaches was a young lady whom I hired just before her 18th birthday. And she wanted to work at night so she could go to school. I said, well, we'll have to talk about that. We'll work out something because you cannot work late nights. She was too young and didn't know how to handle the crowd, the kind of thing, the guys. So I just kind of took over as her mom. And she was the one that knew how to make the chili. She was the one that went with me to Chicago when we were on Steve Harvey's chili competition program. And she was from the inner city and much smarter than I was about things like that.
And she worked here for how long?
45 years.
And just recently passed.
She just recently passed, yeah. And she passed because she did have one little bad habit, just one, cigarettes. Yeah.
Was smoking ever allowed in Ben's?
When we first opened, yeah, but we stopped that. Oh, we were one of the first restaurants to stop that. And what's the guy's name? It was a singer. Came by and announced it with me. I'll never think of it right now. But popular guy. And he was one of those that wanted to come in the back door too. And he was the one to announce to the public that Ben's there would be no more smoking in Ben's. One of the first restaurants in Washington to do that.
Bernard Demczuk, in your book, you talk about a movement, quote, don't shop where you can't work.
So once again, back to the 40s, 50s, and even into the 60s, African Americans were discriminated against from working in certain white-owned businesses. And it was Marion Barry in 60, 67, 68 who began the don't shop where you can't work movement. Now, Marion Barry initiated that in the 60s and 60s. However, that actually started down the street in 1933 by Howard University students. There was one particular store that was notorious, owned by white people, but refused to hire any black people. The Howard students set up a picket line in front of the store, and they said, and the picket line said, don't shop where you can't work. And this is an all-black community, and within 2 weeks, the place had to shut down because they couldn't make any money. They gave up and they said, okay, we quit, we'll hire. And they did. And then the movement continued. By early 1950s, it is estimated that 5,000 African Americans got jobs because of that 1933 picket line called "Don't Shop Where You Can't Work." It took Marion Barry up until 1967 to reinstitute that movement, and it began to work. It worked all over, not just here, but also, not here mostly, actually, not here. Mostly Connecticut Avenue and 8th Street Northeast.
Virginia Alley, how long have your employees generally stayed with you?
Oh, wow. So many of them were here 10, 12 years. And we always had one person that stayed a long time. And initially we had a lot of students. So they would be here for 4 years or 6 years if they started when they were in high school. And then they go to one of the local colleges and then move on. So I have the pleasure of having so many, I guess, 3 or 4 generations now coming back to go to school. And the grandparents, if they come with them, will tell them, this is how I made it through to school. We used to require our college students, or even high school, to let us see what their schedule looked like in college. Because we're not going to let you work until 3 o'clock in the morning if you got an 8 o'clock class. We will work out something so that it can make it easier for you to do what's most important, and that's your education.
Now, a couple weeks ago, I had breakfast at Ben's at the airport. How many locations do you have now? This is the original. This is the
Well,
mothership.
there are 4 others that my kids opened up, and one is Reagan Airport, one is our National Baseball Stadium, one is the Convention Center, and there's another one at 10th and 8th Streets Northeast. Yeah.
Have you visited those locations?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I was in Boston over the weekend. I stopped at the one in Reagan Airport on my way home.
Did they know who you were?
Of course.
But we're fortunate that Giant Foods actually takes our chili and half smokes.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so in their deli section at Giant Foods, you can buy Ben's.
And all 3 of your sons and daughters-in-law are active in the...
All 3 of my sons, one son is a lawyer, but he didn't practice anymore. He works for Ben. All 3 of my sons and 2 of my daughter-in-laws. The 3rd daughter-in-law is a nurse practitioner with a specialty in psychiatry, so she's a counselor. And their offices are now building next door.
Bernard Demczuk, in simple form, what's the legacy, the history of Ben's Chili Bowl?
Community building. Community building. This is a place where you can feel comfortable, where you can exhale from the outside world, where you can listen to good music. This is a place that the community feels comfortable, and in the very rough times that Mrs. Ali talked about, the community always came to our aid. They always were here in the rough times. And we give back, Mrs. Ali gives back to the community all the time. We have a foundation. We've been around since 2010. We give away about $50,000 a year to local youth groups. And we like our community as much as they like us. And it's a symbiotic relationship of love, quite frankly.
You know, I have to just say one more thing about this pandemic. When the pandemic came and a reporter came and said to me, Mrs. Allen, how are you doing? I said, we're struggling. He wrote, Ben's Chili Bowl is on the brink. And I started getting these letters from people. And I remember the very first one. I don't have much money, but I love Ben's Chili Bowl. Please accept my $25 money order. And then there would be the $50 and the $60 and the hundreds and the so on up. Helped us a great deal when we were packing those lunches for Howard University Hospital and for the first responders and all of that. And I thought, wow, this is so amazing that the community is so responsive and helpful and wanted us to survive. That meant a lot to me.
Virginia Ali, Ben's Chili Bowl, Bernard Demczuk, historian of Ben's Chili Bowl. Thank you, Bull.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
and the podcast you've been listening to was taped at Ben's Chili Bowl on U Street in Washington, D.C. Thanks for joining us. Next week on the Q&A podcast, New York Times columnist and Duke University professor Frank Bruni joins us to talk about his new book, The Age of Grievance.